Orbital Gardens, this is Mission Control. We are confirming acquisition of your signal. You are live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hello and welcome to Gardeners of the Galaxy, the podcast for all of the sentient beings of the universe who have a passion for plants. I am Emma the Space Gardener and I will be your host as we explore gardening on Earth and beyond. It has been an exciting summer in space, with 2 astronauts from the Polaris Dawn mission conducting the first private spacewalk. That mission also included an astrobotany experiment, LEO plants, from the US Air Force Academy. That team is now partnering with Rhodium Scientific to send Arabidopsis plants to the International Space Station with Crew 9 to grow in low Earth orbit there for 4 to 6 days. The Polaris Dawn mission flew at a higher Earth orbit, so a comparison between the 2 sets of results could provide insights into the production of crops on long-duration space missions or in higher radiation environments. Our mission specialist for this episode is Benz Kotzen, a Professor of Landscape Architecture and Nature-Based Solutions at the University of Greenwich. Benz's research focuses on real-world issues and solving them by combining new and old technologies with innovative and tried-and-tested natural solutions. He has specific expertise in arid lands, restoration and aquaponics. He also initiated and manages the green roofs on the Stockwell Street building in Greenwich. He's here to tell us about his Feeding Mars project, which showcased a live experiment growing vegetables, herbs and fruits in Martian simulant soils, using fish effluents from an aquaponic system as fertilizer. Before we get to that, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who supports the show, whether that's via a financial contribution or by sharing it with friends and colleagues. Gardeners of the Galaxy wouldn't exist without you. And if you haven't already discovered the Gardeners of the Galaxy Mission Report, it's a weekly email newsletter packed with astrobotany news and updates. To subscribe, visit theunconventionalgardener.com and click the newsletter link in the top right corner. Hi Benz, thanks for coming on the show today. It's great to have you here, and we're going to be hearing about some really interesting research that you are doing. So, hello.
Hi, Emma. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
You are most welcome. Okay, so you are a Professor of Landscape Architecture and Nature-Based Solutions at the University of Greenwich. And one of the areas that you're particularly interested in is aquaponics. So can you explain to us what aquaponics is, please?
Okay, so aquaponics is a food production method which actually has been around for thousands of years, and it was practiced and is still practiced pretty much in China today, and then also at the time right across the world, in South America by the Aztecs, and in a way it's still practiced today in Mexico City. So what it is basically is what you do is you feed the fish, and by feeding the fish produce obviously waste products, and these waste products become the nutrients for the plants. And, this has also been going around for thousands of years. Of course, people have been using horse manure and things for growing plants. So it's in a similar way, except what the system relies on is, of course, fish are produced or growing in water. And what we're doing is by feeding the fish the nutrients which come from the ammonia which is being produced from the gills of the fish as well as from their urine, and then also the waste that is coming from the feces, but we can talk about that because we remove most of that. That nutrient is converted totally naturally in the water by microbes that will occur actually absolutely naturally after about 6 weeks in any water. And these microbes change the ammonia, which is what we're talking about now, from ammonia into nitrite, and then from nitrite into nitrate. And nitrate is fertilizer for plants, basically. Okay. And then, of course, we're talking about potassium and phosphorus, which are the main kind of nutrients. Now, what we're doing actually, so we have the fish in tanks, and this water is then being filtered through, and we have at our university, we have very non-sophisticated filtration methods. I can explain. So the water is passing from the fish tanks into these filtration methods, getting rid of most of the feces, or getting rid of the feces, and then it's flowing into plant tanks. And the roots of the plants are dangling in the water. The plants are floating on some rafts, and the plants are absorbing these nutrients as they go past, cleaning the water. So this is the other part of it, cleaning the water that then gets pumped back to the fish. Now, it's very, very energy efficient because all the process that goes from the fish through the filtration to the plants and then through a number of plant tanks, it gets to a small pump at the end of the plant tanks, gets pumped back to the fish. So it's very, very efficient. And you're getting more than one product for what you're putting in. So, yeah, so it's quite sustainable.
Okay, so if we take that on board, what made you get interested in whether aquaponics would work on Mars?
Okay, so of course there's been a lot of talk and a lot of stuff in the media about man moving away from planet Earth to the moon as well as to Mars, which are the only kind of two other kind of places in our solar system where man could possibly survive, obviously with very special kind of equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit of a long story as well because basically the moon and Mars are very, very hostile, even though man can live there under, closed conditions in I guess, in pods and things like that. But we have places on Earth that I've visited which are very, very similar to the places on Mars.
Okay.
And these places, for example, are very arid and they don't have what we would call soils. So the thing about Mars and the Earth, they have things which are called regoliths. And regoliths are basically rocks that have been worn down over time by radiation, by cold and heat, etc., and then basically that kind of makes finer particles, and it's on the way to making soil. But in order to have soil, in order to have something to grow in those regoliths, you actually have to have organic material. And obviously on Mars and on the moon, we don't have organic material. And in some places on Earth, like, for example, in Africa, very dry parts of Africa, I've traveled there, and it made me think, these people who live there struggle enormously to make a living, also to get fresh produce. They would live on, I guess, animal meat, goats and stuff like that, and milk mainly, but they don't get any vegetables, they can't grow anything, etc. And I started looking at aquaponics for those kind of areas, and then reading about the moon and Mars, these two kind of areas kind of paralleled one another, and so that was it. And it also made me think, why is this kind of rush to get to the moon and Mars? And, I started looking into it, and it kind of became obvious in the end that one day we're going to have another extinction event on Earth. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And mankind is going to disappear, possibly disappear on Earth. And the idea is, obviously there's a scientific reason why people want to go, and the political reasons why people want to go, geopolitical reasons why people want to go to Mars. But the main reason is to create another part of human civilization somewhere if we get destroyed on Earth. And that kind of interested me, and I thought, well, okay, if you go to the moon, you could probably get a McDonald's to the moon in a couple of days. But on Mars, you can't do it because it's 8 months away or a year away. And so you have to grow your own food there.
Yeah. Although it did make me think, I think somebody kept a McDonald's burger under a bell jar for years and years and years, and it didn't change very much. So it might actually survive the trip to Mars.
Yes, it probably yes. You probably don't need much kind of treatment of it. Or I guess you could vacuum pack it as well, just to make sure.
Okay, so you and your colleagues, you carried out a pilot study in Greenwich called Feeding Mars, and that was in spring 2022. So
yes.
What did that involve?
Okay, so at the time, I think I had an opportunity. Yes, this was mulling around in my head, and I was trying to think about how to do a project, and I think some kind of internal funds and monies came about, and I thought, well, okay, what I will do, I won't do a kind of all singing and dancing, bells on the wrists and feet project, which would take a lot of time and money. I can do a very small project, which will just look at the principles and see whether the kind of proof of concept would work. And I managed to do this with a very, very small budget in a pretty much small period of time. And at the same time, I had this idea of, I was trying to figure out where I was going to put this on our campus. And I thought, well, this is something that I know people will be interested in. Why don't we put it in a kind of exhibition or gallery space? Something that myself and other kind of scientists or researchers would like to do is to bring research to the public. And that was, it all kind of fitted together quite well. Mm-hmm. At the time. So that was kind of the impetus for doing it then.
And what did the project actually involve?
Okay, so the project itself involved, it's basically the principle of aquaponics, which, as I said, what you need is fish tanks and you need some filtration. You also need to be able to obviously have the plants as well. Now, there are different kinds of aquaponic systems. There are aquaponic systems like we have on our roof, which I described, which is a kind of a return system. It's called a recirculating aquaculture system, RAS. And the water, as I said, goes from the fish through the filtration to the plants, gets cleansed, goes back to the fish. Here, we're not doing that. What we're doing is we're taking the water from the fish, we're filtering it. And what we did is take that water and put it on the plants. And this is basically what we call is a kind of soil-based aquaponics, which actually is an anomaly because aquaponics normally doesn't have any soil involved.
Yeah.
But, we could have pure aquaponic systems on the Moon and Mars, kind of this one-way kind of system which keeps kind of perpetually going round and round, or we can be extracting the nutrients from the aquaponic system and then putting it into the regolith. And so putting the microbes, etc., into this regolith or to the soil, and then so making it actually alive. And actually, that's one of the principles of organic agriculture, etc., that the soil needs to be alive. The soil of places in Africa, which I spoke of, and on the Moon and Mars. In Africa, there would still be some microbes, etc., in these very harsh regoliths. But on the Moon and Mars, there'll be no microbes. But what we would be doing is putting these microbes into this regolith and trying to create a soil, so a living soil. So what we did, trying to emulate the kind of thing that would happen on the Moon and Mars, we also purchased a grow tent, which is basically used in very intense agriculture of a certain kind. And so basically, they're really quite nice things in themselves. It's about 2.5 meters tall, the one we had, and about 1.5 or 2 meters square. And within it, it's got very highly polished silvery surfaces on the inside. Uh-huh. There's windows that you can look in, which was great, so the people could look into it. And then there's a very strong light, of course. So what we're doing is we're trying to emulate daylight and, in fact, even more intense light so that we can get the plants to grow. And then basically that's what we did. We put this all together, and then we planted the produce or the plants in a variety of regoliths and soils. So what we did with regard to the planting medium, there is a company in the United States called the Martian Garden, who produce simulant Martian soils for research purposes. Mm-hmm. And we got in touch with them, and they put together a mix of regoliths, what they thought would be good for us. But, importing it from the United States was expensive.
It's hugely expensive, the shipping, yeah.
Yes, we couldn't grow everything in that simulant. So what we had was is called an analog, which basically what we did is I followed a recipe for making a Martian soil using the ingredients that were devised by the Chicago Botanic Gardens.
Okay.
So I actually manufactured those regoliths here in the UK. Now, the ingredients are pretty much the same, but I think the simulant that came from the United States was a little bit more sophisticated. Basically, the rocks on Mars are basalt, and they're red basalt, whereas, for example, in the UK, it's grey basalt, but it's the same stuff. And then there's feldspar and a few other things. So we had two, Martian regoliths that I was using. So, for example, using the red regolith, which came from the United States, we grew, things in smaller pots like lettuce and onions and things like that. But when I was growing potatoes and beans and things like that, I used the grey regolith, which I manufactured myself or made myself because of the cost. And then, of course, we had to have a control medium, to see how the plants would perform in comparison to, for example, a horticultural soil, just a normal horticultural soil that you get from a DIY shop, and then these two different kinds of simulants.
That sounds really exciting. Really fascinating.
Yeah, it was. It was fun. A lot of fun. And yeah, I like doing things that are fun and interesting.
Okay, so what happened? You put all this together, you had your exhibition. What happened next?
Okay, so one of the things was the results of what we did. There were, I guess, just looking at it in different ways. The exhibition idea was a very good one because people were crazily or, very, very interested in everything. They were interested in the technology. They were interested in, why going to Mars, all the reasons behind it. They were interested in how the plants were growing from day to day, etc. So, we had people from outside, of course, and then it was in a extension of a gallery space where students could walk through every day. And there would be myself and another PhD student who would be looking after the plants, etc. And every day we would have questions and interaction with mainly students and staff, but then, of course, on the weekends and also during the week from people who came into the gallery space. Our ground floor of our building in Greenwich is actually open access, so, members of the public can come in. And they did. And then in terms of the results, one of the things we also did was we also had a little grow tent where we grew all the seedlings and things like that. We grew them in these different regoliths and in the horticultural soil, and then we transferred them into the bigger pots once they were viable as seedlings. The results on the whole were very positive. On the whole, the plants that were grown in the two regoliths did not perform as well as the horticultural soil, which is pretty much to be expected in a way, because there was a kind of error in kind of what we did. In hindsight, it seemed something we should have done. And also with the horticultural soil, there was this kind of a little bit of an error. So what happened is most of the plants, for example, the potatoes, we produced potatoes in both the regoliths and both regoliths and, of course, in the horticultural soil, but a few more potatoes for example, in the horticultural soil. The beans, we got, every plant did okay. The onions were pretty similar. We had lettuces, and what was interesting actually with the lettuces and the potatoes, those species actually were far greener in color, so they had much more nitrogen in them, and this is coming from the fish water than that was coming from the horticultural soil. So that was very interesting. In hindsight, the thing that we should have done, which was pretty silly of me, was when we started the seedlings, I started the seedlings by growing them with just normal water.
Yeah.
And then, actually, no, I didn't. I started them using still normal water for the horticultural soil, and then for the regoliths was the fish water. So they both of them grew fine as seedlings, and that's pretty normal because most seeds and seedlings, the seeds actually have the energy in the seed to produce the seedling. So once the seedling is grown, we transferred it to the pots. But what I should have done is I should have started watering those pots or putting fish water into those pots, so the microbes started already working.
Yes.
So instead of waiting a little bit, so basically we had a kind of slowed reaction in the regoliths with the fish water, whereas the horticultural soil was already kind of swimming with nutrients, etc. And then the plants could just grow. The other thing, of course, which kind of skewed things a little bit was actually, so whilst when we were feeding the regoliths with fish water, and you could see, for example, that the potatoes were greener and the lettuce were greener, everything was greener with the regolith pots, there was a starting to get a nutrient deficiency in the horticultural soil, because most horticultural soils actually, if they say they will have enough nutrients for a month or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so, but, all in all, it was never meant to be kind of this big, heavy hitting scientific exercise. It was a proof of concept to kind of show that, this kind of research can be done, and that we would like to, take this forward into a bigger project. But we did kind of prove that, we can grow plants, certain kinds of plants. Of course, we didn't grow everything. We chose a kind of balanced diet for our our community on Mars.
Yeah.
But we didn't grow absolutely everything, of course, because it's just just not enough space and time and money. Yeah, but we've shown that even with our kind of little primitive experiment, people could have survived. We had potatoes, we had beans, we had lettuce. So you could get your greens, and you could get a little bit of flavor from the onions and stuff like that.
Mark Watney would have had a much easier time on Mars if they'd sent him with a few packets of seeds, wouldn't they?
Exactly. Yes.
Not just steady
yes.
diet potatoes.
And a few fish. I mean, the other thing about having fish on, so by taking fish, let's say, to the moon and Mars, is we're talking about creating a living soil. Now, of course, when you're growing any kind of vegetable, whether it's if you're doing it in soil or in a pot or even in aquaponics, you're going to get some detritus. You're going to get some leaves that are not doing so well. You'll cut them off. You're also going to, for example, if you're making a lettuce salad, there's some parts of the lettuce you're not going to use. So you can be making compost from that and then adding it to the soil. And then the other thing is, if, for example, you're going to have fish, if you're going to eat the fish, then you're going to have the bones and the skin and etc., which is also going to then become more nutrients that you can put back into the soil. Yeah. So you are going to kind of have this kind of enrichment going on, this process going on. And, we have this this concept of the circular economy, where waste is part of the whole production system. And that's exactly what, would happen in something like, having fish on or aquaponics on Mars.
Yeah. Okay. And so you mentioned that this was a pilot project and you had hopes of it becoming something else. So you going on and doing more research in this area, is that still on the cards?
Yes, it is on the cards. It's just, finding funds for research very often relies, sometimes there are open calls, so, you can just send in a research project, etc. And it's very time consuming, and the chances of getting them are kind of slim, but sometimes there are calls that are very directed. And then, probably just waiting for a directed call or a little bit of more space and time, which I can work on.
Okay, so we will look forward to that, and we will keep our eyes out that be coming up in the future. Okay, so I don't know whether you just saw the news that Blue Origin just took a biologist into space. He was doing his own research on their suborbital flight. Rob Furl was doing some experiments with plants in little tubes. I always ask people, if they were given that opportunity to take their research into space, would they want to go? So would you want to go into space? Would you want to go to Mars?
Yes, for sure. Yes, I would. Yes, I would. I think, one of the things, I was trying to get my head around when I was thinking about having colonies on Mars was, why would anybody want to go to Mars? Because actually we live on paradise. I'm just looking out my window and I can see, it's just phenomenal. There's biological life, and that doesn't exist, as far as we know, anywhere else amongst the billions and billions of galaxies and stars and black holes and all of it, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And so we live in a place which has got so much biodiversity and stuff like that, and there's so much that I still need to see on this planet.
Yes.
So although all of us have been, I guess, lucky to have traveled, or most of us, but we've seen, most of us just don't see the whole planet. So I guess if I could go to Mars and come back, I don't want to stay there.
Yeah.
Then that would be good. I would like that. but I've still got so much to see and look at on Earth. I mean, the other day, for example, I was traveling and I saw a chameleon cross the road. And I mean, how many millions of years does it take to make a
I know.
chameleon? And I mean, just looking at any kind of plant, any plant that is drought tolerant or it's got leathery leaves, and can survive without water a whole year and things like that. How
Yeah.
long does nature take to do that? And there are thousands of these different species, etc., who all have adapted or do different things. And then, of course, we're not talking about then there's the insects and
Oh.
the
And the
animals,
ants.
etc. And the ants, and who knows about? Nobody knows about all the ants. So yes, I'd like to go there, come back, and explore the rest of the Earth.
Sounds good. Okay, so you're packing for your trip to Mars. You've got all your research plants and all your food. Everything like that is set, but there is room in your luggage for one plant to be your personal companion on the journey.
Yes.
What plant would you choose to take with you and why?
Okay. You may be able to gather from my accent that I originate in South Africa. I originate probably in the middle of the country from Johannesburg. Everybody's heard of that. But when I was a child, and even today, if I travel from the middle of the country to the north, we start getting baobab trees. And baobab trees, in fact, if you go to the Kruger National Park, which is the big game reserve in the northeast of South Africa, there's the southernmost baobab tree in the world. And then I've traveled in Kenya as well, and you get these forests of these baobab trees. And these baobab trees there's something about them. They're basically what's above the tree is pretty similar to what's below the tree. So it's kind of roots in the sky. And there's something very phenomenal. And some of these trees are so big that they've been hollowed out and people live in them. And they've got stories to tell, and they've got this biology and this history that is so phenomenal. Now, in space, baobab tree, I guess, would never be allowed to get full grown. Because you're going to have to.
Not yet.
No, you're going to have a pretty kind of expensive pod or glass house to keep your baobab tree if it's but yeah, it's just a phenomenal species, and the ones they're all slightly different. The ones in Madagascar, for example, are just so beautiful. There's something about the trunk which is kind of elephantine and like elephant skin and stuff. It's just beautiful. They're beautiful things. And then of course also they produce a fruit or a seed pod, which is basically cream of tartar. That's where we get cream of tartar from. And it basically means cream of tartar. You can make cakes.
I did not know that.
Yes, it is. That's our origination. I think now they probably make a chemical version of cream of tartar. But yeah, it's a raising agent, and that's where it originally comes from. Yeah.
That's amazing. I don't know whether anybody's ever tried to bonsai a baobab tree so you could have a space version.
There are other succulent types of plants which kind of look like baobab trees. So but I think when they're small, they don't look anything like when they're big.
I was just trying to imagine what a baobab seedling would look like, and I've got no clue, so I'm going to have to go and Google that now. Or how.
But they come in these big pods, longish, I guess maybe a foot long pod, which is kind of, I think, a little bit furry, khaki green or browny, and then inside there's these black seeds. I think they're black seeds within this white powder, which is creme of tartar.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing.
I don't know why they don't call it creme of baobab. I'm sure there's a reason.
No, I mean, I am assuming it's quite a slow growing tree because they're very long lived, aren't they?
Yes. So slow. Yeah. Thousands of years old, some of the, yes, definitely, yeah. I guess all trees kind of grow horizontally as well as vertically, but the baobab puts a lot of effort in growing horizontally, so the trunks are quite, some of them are massive. I guess that's one of the things why they grow slowly. It's because they're trying to grow horizontally and vertically at the same time.
No, that is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing, a baobab tree in my space greenhouse, so that would be absolutely brilliant. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely fabulous. Benz, thank you for coming on the show today and telling us about your research. It's so exciting.
It's my pleasure, Emma. Yeah. I'm also very happy if people want to contact me. I'm always happy to talk to people or if they've got any questions or sometimes, we also have these green roofs on Greenwich.
Yes.
And so if anybody's interested in it, there might be garden groups or anything, and if they want to visit and stuff like that, we do things like that.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. We're going to be looking forward to seeing what you do with this in the future. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Emma. Bye.
Thanks again to Benz for coming on the show and talking about his fantastic astrobotany project. I'll include the links to find out more about his work in the show notes, which you'll find on my website at theunconventionalgardener.com. You can also sign up to the Gardens of the Galaxy newsletter for new episode alerts and bonus astrobotany content. That's it for this episode, so I'll hand you back to Mission Control. Capcom, the zucchini plants have gone bonkers and I've got a bumper crop I'd love to share with the Moon Colony. When's the next supply mission headed their way?
Orbital Gardens, this is Mission Control, confirming termination of your signal. We've had a request that you stop supplying your surplus zucchini to the Moon Colony. They've had about as much zucchini bread as they can stomach. Mission Control out.